Our goal in this and coming sections is to get an overview of the executive neural control circuits that permit our nervous system to govern itself. What does it mean to govern oneself? It means the ability and freedom to decide based on one's own needs, desires, and priorities, and to be able to consider many possible courses of action or thought. It means the capacity to select the best course of action or thought based on one's own reasons and evaluations. And finally, it means the capacity to stick to a self-determined course of action, come what may. Since we make decisions in various domains of thought and action, there are probably different executive processes associated with each class of our decision-making and self-control, self-regulation, or self-governance. Some executive processes you would want to be volitional, such as deliberation regarding whom to marry. In contrast, other executive decisions should probably not be volitional. As an example of the latter sort, an animal that could will to make something that smells disgusting smell delicious might then go eat it and then get sick and die. There are good and ancient reasons why we cannot will to make vomit or feces smell good, or will to find visible indicators of genetic dishealth or low fertility attractive. Genes that permitted that kind of volitional control got weeded out long ago. Conversely, what smells good is also probably in part innately programmed in our genes. But that does not mean that we have to be slavishly driven by such non-volitional and perhaps innate programming. This is because there are other centers of decision-making that can override non-volitional decisions such as that smells good, or that looks attractive, or that smells bad, or that looks unattractive. For example, let's say that you are a vegan on moral grounds. You might still find the odor of barbecued meat really good and delicious. You might find that smelling barbecued ribs makes your mouth water against your will. But you can override that desire and choose to eat vegetables for your own, in this case, moral reasons. Conversely, you might find some vegetarian dish unappetizing, but force yourself to eat it nonetheless so that you do not, say, insult the host who put so much effort into making that just for you. You can act on the basis of your reasons rather than your desires if your executive neural circuitry is in working order. Some psychologists and philosophers have talked about hot or first-order desires like wanting to eat ice cream because it'll taste good, and other cold or second-order desires like simultaneously not wanting to eat the ice cream because you don't want to gain even more weight. When there's no conflict between desire and other goal-seeking systems, there's no problem. If I say, you must kiss that beautiful person with whom you're madly in love, you'll probably say, sure, no problem. Or if I say, you must not eat this vomit, you'll say, okay, no problem. But if your father commands you to never again see the person you're madly in love with, there will be conflict between the desire to obey your father and your desire to see your beloved. Conversely, if I say you must eat your unappetizing dinner or you'll insult the host, then there's again a conflict. Executive control is essential in regulating our behavior and minds, especially in such cases of conflict where prioritization and appropriate sequencing among opposing goals is required. Self-governance is most evident in cases where one or more of our brain's goal-seeking circuits must be inhibited in the service of fulfilling the aims of another of our brain's goal-seeking circuits. It turns out that key executive circuitry lies here, behind our foreheads. If we lose key frontal lobe circuitry, whether through a frontal lobotomy, the degeneration of neurons associated with frontotemporal dementia or Alzheimer's disease, or brain damage, we might well lose volitional executive control of our bodies and minds. The most famous example of such a loss is Phineas Gage. He actually worked in this town where I also now work in Hanover, New Hampshire. Here's how he looked before his accident, looking quite dashing, I think. He was a foreman working with his crew, laying down railroad tracks at this location in Cavendish, Vermont. This was before the invention of dynamite. So he and his men put gunpowder into a crack in the granite and laid down a long fuse. Normally, they should have covered the gunpowder with some sand before tamping it down, but Phineas got distracted and tamped the gunpowder down with this iron rod directly. This made it spark, which then blew the iron spike through his brain, as shown here. The spike landed 80 feet or more than 25 meters away, covered with his blood and brains. Incredibly, Mr. Gage did not die. Instead, he remained conscious and was able to talk to the doctor about what had just happened. But he did sustain massive left frontal lobe damage. So clearly, just as an aside, the frontal lobes appear not to be necessary for consciousness. Now, whereas before his accident he was responsible and capable of leading a team of men, after his accident, he had a major personality change. Basically, he lost executive control of his desires and became unable to govern himself, especially in the social and emotional domains. He became impulsive, belligerent, impatient, overly emotional, and disrespectful of social conventions. He screamed at people, he groped them, took what he wanted, and became basically a total jerk. What does the case of Phineas Gage teach us? At one level, we all have an internal Phineas Gage that's being held in check by our capacities to self-govern and inhibit ourselves. That capacity is realized here. We all have multiple goals at the same time, and these have to be prioritized and sequenced correctly if we are to reach our highest level goals and not undermine them. We can feel various bodily desires at the same time. For example, we can feel thirsty, tired, hungry, and feel in need of cooling down, all at the same time. In addition, we can feel various emotions at the same time. We can feel angry and ashamed and afraid all at the same time. Then we can also have immediate cognitive goals. For example, we might want to finish making dinner as quickly as possible and pay attention to an ongoing conversation as well as we can, both at the same time. And we can also have longer-term cognitive goals like wanting to get into college or travel to Chile, as Phineas Gage did after his accident. Given that we can simultaneously pursue numerous goals and sub-goals, how can we organize our planning to optimize the fulfillment of these different goals? And given that we have desires, emotions, conscious perception of the world, and the inner virtual reality of our imagination, we surely have to have ways of regulating within and between these different classes of our mental existence as well. We need ways to regulate our emotions, our desires, our thoughts, and our actions. Not surprisingly, the brain appears to have developed specialized neural circuitry for each of these domains that is tantamount to having modular mental organs specialized for these various capacities. Each such mental capacity involves its own internal processes of regulation, control, and prioritization, and executive control processes govern the prioritization of processes across these mental organs. If we lose the capacity for such control, we might become like Phineas Gage, or a disinhibited frontotemporal dementia patient, or we might be like a 2-year-old with temper tantrums and impetuous wants that need to be filled right now. We all begin life unable to govern ourselves well, but with practice, feedback, and the wiring up of executive circuits behind our foreheads, we get better at governing ourselves. With enough practice, we can even attain self-mastery.